Trump White House is being accused of witness tampering. A new report out from the Senate Judiciary Committee alleges that the Trump White House blocked the FBI's investigation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh before he was named to the Supreme Court. The investigation, which was led by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse 6 years after he launched a Senate inquiry, reported that the Trump White House prohibited the FBI from choosing whom to interview and from following up on potential leads that might have corroborated the allegations of sexual harassment laid out by Christine Blasey Ford.
Remember the explosive hearings that took place in 2018 in the wake of Me Too? To jog your memory, on September 12, 2018, allegations of sexual misconduct by Kavanaugh, which had not been uncovered during the FBI's full-field background investigation, began to surface. Over the next few days, senators and the public learned of accusations by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford that Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted her while the two were in high school. According to a letter Ford sent to Senator Dianne Feinstein, then the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, quote, Brett Kavanaugh physically and sexually assaulted during high school in the early 1980s by locking her in a bedroom, climbing on top of her, attempting to remove her clothes, and putting his hand over her mouth to stop her from screaming. Kavanaugh publicly denied Ford's allegations. After Ford came forward, new allegations of sexual misconduct by Kavanaugh emerged, most notably from Deborah Ramirez, a classmate of Kavanaugh's at Yale University. On September 23, 2018, The New Yorker reported Ramirez's allegation that while in college, Kavanaugh exposed himself at a drunken dormitory party, thrust his genital in her face, and caused her to touch it without her consent as she pushed him away. Kavanaugh denied all those allegations.
In the end, it became a case of he said, she said. The report says that the Trump administration, quote, exercised total control over the scope of the investigation and prevented the FBI from interviewing certain witnesses and following leads. As a result, the probe into the allegations against Kavanaugh was, quote, flawed and incomplete and unworthy of reliance by the Senate, the report says. While President Trump publicly claimed the FBI had free rein to take any investigative steps it deemed necessary, although the Trump administration and the FBI assured the Senate that the FBI's investigation was being conducted by the book, they failed to disclose that there was actually no, quote, book at all, according to the report.
Pretty incredible report to come out now 6 years. It's amazing that it's been 6 years since that explosive hearing. I remember watching it live, obviously Dr. Ford's testimony, and then Brett Kavanaugh's response that got pretty heated. Obviously, then SNL, it became lore after the fact with SNL lampooning the entire process. But certainly damning allegations of what the FBI did and failed to do in this report, Amber.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when you go back to what was actually happening here, I don't find it really that explosive. We do know that the FBI had already conducted 6 background checks by the time Christine Blasey Ford came forward with her allegations, and the FBI has released a statement in response to this report indicating that they followed the normal protocol, which is that when there is a supplemental background investigation into someone who is going through a Senate confirmation process, the White House does direct the scope of the investigation, which in this case was to find out more information about Christine Blasey Ford and Deborah Ramirez's allegations. And then the FBI typically has free rein, as Trump put it, to determine how exactly it is they want to corroborate or prove that these allegations did not happen. And they did interview all of the firsthand witnesses, aside from Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford, who at that point had both already testified publicly in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So they talked to Mark Judge, who was the only firsthand witness of the alleged Christine Blasey Ford assault, who has vehemently denied it all the way through. And then Leland Kaiser, I'm not sure if she was actually ever interviewed by the FBI, but I do know that she publicly rejected the allegation. She was a close friend of Christine Blasey Ford. And I do find it a little bit ironic that Senator Whitehouse and some of the other Democrats who are reacting to this report would accuse the Trump White House of witness tampering when people close to Christine Blasey Ford called Leland Kaiser at the time and encouraged her to change her story when Christine Blasey Ford went public.
I mean, one of the amazing things, and you just said too, that there was no follow-up by the FBI to directly interview Dr. Ford. I don't believe they interviewed Ms. Ramirez as well. And the reports suggested that there were 20 other former classmates, names that Ms. Ramirez gave to the FBI that would corroborate at least what had happened during the Yale incident and the Yale years. And the FBI failed to bring those folks in. I know timing was of the essence. Obviously, Jeff Flake, others delayed the hearing because they wanted this full field background check. 8 of those senators, Republican senators, cited that FBI report clearing, at that time, Judge Kavanaugh of these accusations as the reason why they voted for him in the end, in a vote that was 50 to 48, really tight vote, obviously back 6 years ago. But the fact that so many of these folks that were willing to testify on the record, at least in the Ramirez case from Yale, that the FBI failed to even have that conversation or a follow-up conversation with Dr. Ford. I know she testified under oath for many hours, led by Republicans and Democrats on that Judiciary Committee. But the fact that there was no sit-down and Dr. Ford's attorney requested that sit-down with Dr. Ford was pretty extraordinary. Yeah,
I do recall that early on in the process, I believe she was offered to come in for an FBI interview and declined that offer, and then decided to, of course, she was compelled to testify publicly in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So it was a little interesting that her team suddenly wanted to do the FBI interview weeks later when they opened the supplemental investigation. But I'm not sure I buy the idea that Deborah Ramirez had offered up all of these firsthand witnesses, because when this New Yorker story first came out, they actually admitted in the story that none of the other people who were supposedly at this party were either willing or had any knowledge of this alleged incident. They said that they didn't remember anything like that ever happening. Deborah Ramirez was the only firsthand witness who was willing to attest to this. So I'm not sure I buy the idea that she suddenly had 20 witnesses that she was offering up to the FBI who believed or saw that this occurred. And then one of the other complaints in this report is the individual by the name of Mr. Steyer, who says that he knew of another victim of Brett Kavanaugh, and the alleged victim in that case was interviewed by the media as well and said she had no recollection of the incident. So this coming out 6 years later seems a little bit convenient to me. I mean, sure, maybe it took them 6 years to gather all of this supposed evidence, but this was fully litigated, I think, at the time. I mean, if not in the media, then certainly in the Senate Judiciary Committee. The FBI looked into all of the firsthand witnesses according to their purview laid out by the White House, and saying, well, they didn't interview so-and-so's friend who heard about it 3 years later, that just doesn't pass muster for me.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously an exhaustive process led by Senator Whitehouse. It reminds me of the other exhaustive process led by Dianne Feinstein when it came to the torture memos and the CIA, kind of a single-handed investigation by a sitting member of the Senate. One of the other fascinating things that came out of that report, too, was the fact that the FBI tip line for any kind of evidence to come forward, for people's recollections to be shared with the FBI, was forwarded to the Trump. The information from that tip line was forwarded to the Trump White House. I don't know if that's been the case with other judicial nominees. Obviously, the president is the head of the Judiciary Department, sets the scope of those investigations. The FBI ultimately is an executive branch agency. But if that's the case for other investigations, that is pretty questionable, I think, as a process goes, that a partisan political operation would receive the evidence from the FBI in that tip line ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the standard for that typically is, and obviously the FBI wouldn't have time to investigate. I think they got 4,000 tips during that period.
Is that right? Okay.
So it was in the thousands, according to the report, which is crazy. I don't know what the standard process for that is. I can't say. I think if there's anything that the Democrats should be a little bit careful about with this type of report, which makes this sort of more generalized allegation that the FBI and the White House are very intrinsically linked, right? That the FBI is something that is under the purview of the White House, according to the steps that the Trump White House took in this case. There would be a lot less daylight between Merrick Garland and Joe Biden, which would potentially give more credence to allegations that Merrick Garland and the DOJ right now are engaging in political prosecutions against Donald Trump. So I think that would be something that I would be a little bit careful about if I were a Democrat.
Well, more to come on, certainly on that front. Obviously, there's a new book, Bob Woodward, coming out next week where, it's reported that Joe Biden has been furious with Merrick Garland. Certainly more to come, I think, on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to keep following it right here on Rising. We have a lot more to cover. Stay tuned.